The weight of 15 years pressed down on me the day my mother, Miranda Maxwell, announced her engagement to Barnaby Steele. It had only been half a year since my father, Felix Maxwell, was unjustly imprisoned for a violent crime he swore he didn't commit. I was with him that evening. He just finished his shift at the local pub, planning to grab a quick bite before heading home. He stepped into the restroom and moments later burst out, face ashen, hands smeared with crimson. He yelled for someone to dial the emergency line, and uniformed officers were there in a flash. Without a single word, they clamped cold metal around his wrists and led him away. The next time my eyes met his, thick bars separated us. It was a scenario that defied logic. My father, a man whose gentle nature was his defining trait, simply wasn't capable of such an act. And my mother's reaction in the aftermath only fueled my burgeoning doubt. Barnaby Steele was a fixture in our home almost immediately. On his very first visit, Miranda declared him my new paternal figure, asserting that Felix was a monster from whom I needed to distance myself for my own welfare. I wavered, caught between her insistent words and my gut feeling. But when, 5 months later, she gleefully announced their engagement and instructed me to begin addressing Barnaby as Papa, my conviction in Felix's innocence solidified. It was around this time that Barnaby's unsettling behavior began. He'd watch me during meals, his gaze lingering, his chewing slow and deliberate. He'd utter phrases that made my skin crawl like, "You're blossoming into quite the young woman, aren't you?" The most disturbing part was Miranda's starry-eyed approval, mistaking his predatory observations for genuine affection. When I first confided in Miranda that Barnaby made me deeply uncomfortable, she dismissed my feelings as teenage dramatics. She must have mentioned my complaint to him, however, because that very night, after she'd fallen asleep, Barnaby slipped into my room. He seized my wrist, his grip leaving angry red marks, and his voice, barely a whisper, was laced with venom. Little birds who sing out of turn often find their wings clipped. Terror seized me, but I knew then that Miranda was not a safe confidant. I would guard this secret. Another secret started to grow within me around that time. I began composing letters to Felix, my true father. I'd carefully fold them between the pages of my history textbook. Then, after school, I'd slip away to Amelia Finch's house to mail them from her local postbox. Felix would respond through the prison's digital messaging system, sending replies to an email account I had painstakingly set up without Miranda's knowledge. The situation spiraled particularly badly one dismal Thursday. I arrived home from school to discover that Miranda had altered my last name on all official school documents to Barnaby's, without a single word of discussion. "You'll appreciate it when you're older, Delia," she chirped. That evening, Barnaby entered my room, ostensibly to celebrate our new official family status. He settled onto my bed, his presence feeling like a lead blanket. His hand landed on my thigh, his touch heavy and possessive, as he declared I should be grateful for such a caring father. I recoiled, shoving him away, and barricaded myself in the bathroom until his presence retreated. I vividly remember detailing that incident in a letter to Felix. The response I received back was no longer a sterile email. It was written on actual paper, some parts of the page smudged and translucent, as if tears had fallen as he wrote. That visible display of his anguish nearly shattered my composure. Yet, amidst the dread, there was a glimmer of anticipation, the prospect of seeing him. Felix's birthday was approaching, and I recall pleading with Miranda, my voice thick with fervent hope, to allow me a visit. I told her I understood her feelings, but it was his birthday. Just a few minutes, just today. "Please," I'd implored. Her response, predictably, was a harsh refusal. Worse still, she declared that the very same weekend, Barnaby coincidentally possessed tickets to a car show, and we were all expected to attend. He had specifically requested adjoining hotel rooms. When I countered, stating my preference to visit Felix, Miranda erupted. "He's a murderer, Delia. You are not visiting a killer." When I insisted on his innocence, reminding her he was still my father, Barnaby's open palms struck my face with a sickening thud, and Miranda stood by, silent. I was coerced into accompanying them that weekend, and in the dead of night, the unthinkable transpired. Barnaby stole into our adjoining room. He reeked of alcohol, and this time, his restraint was utterly gone. His hand traveled beyond my thigh, far beyond. I had never felt such a profound sense of defilement and utter humiliation. The journey home was a blur of silent agony. To compound my misery, the week we returned, Miranda discovered the hidden letters from Felix. She incinerated them in the backyard, reducing my last, tangible connection to my father to ash. And as punishment for my continued communication with him, she had my bedroom door removed from its hinges, ostensibly for monitoring. Naturally, Barnaby seized this as an opportunity. He would stand in the doorway at night, a dark silhouette watching me as I feigned sleep. That, I remember, was my true breaking point. The next day, after school hours, I slipped into the silent school library. I must have typed a rambling, incoherent email to Felix, pouring out every terrifying detail for over an hour. I was numb, unsure of what I expected, or even wanted. But 2 weeks later, his lengthy reply arrived. It was full of soothing words, assuring me that everything would somehow be all right. But one sentence stood out, stark and perplexing. "Did you look where I mentioned?" Confusion swirled. Look where? I meticulously combed through every email he'd ever sent. And then, I found it. In one of his more recent messages, Felix had subtly instructed me to check the attic, specifically behind the old radiator. I remembered reading that email the day after I'd begged Miranda to visit him. I must have been too heartbroken to absorb its true meaning. Regardless, I committed the instruction to memory and waited for Miranda and Barnaby's next date night. It came the following week. My hands trembled as I ascended into the dusty attic, flashlight clutched tight. Behind the radiator, concealed beneath a loose floorboard, I discovered a journal, wrapped tightly in plastic. I tore it open to the marked page Felix had indicated. It was dated weeks before his arrest, in my father's unmistakable handwriting. It's been a few weeks since I caught Miranda and Barnaby slipping away to the pub together. I don't know how to confront her. Shock ripped through me, rendering me breathless. Just then, the crunch of car tires on the driveway made my blood run cold. They were back early. Perhaps the restaurant was too crowded or an argument had cut their evening short. I heard car doors slam, then Miranda's heels clicking a hurried rhythm up the walkway. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clutched the journal to my chest, every fiber of my being screaming that I had mere seconds to act. Barnaby's heavy footsteps resounded on the stairs, each creak of the old wooden steps sending a jolt through my chest. My hands trembled so violently that the flashlight beam danced erratically across the dusty attic floorboards. I shoved the journal beneath my sweater, the cool leather pressing against my skin, and scrambled toward the attic opening. But I was too slow. Barnaby's head emerged through the narrow aperture just as my fingers brushed the ladder. His dark eyes instantly fixed on mine. He stared for an unnervingly long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim, dusty light. Then, with a grunt, he hauled himself fully into the attic, his broad shoulders barely clearing the opening. I instinctively pressed myself against the rough, splintered wall, the journal a hard lump against my stomach. His gaze swept slowly around the attic, deliberately taking in the disturbed film of dust that shimmered like tiny motes in the air. The shifted boxes near the radiator where I'd made my discovery. "What are you doing up here?" he asked, his voice calm, yet edged with a chilling undercurrent that made my skin crawl. I mumbled something about searching for my old stuffed animals from childhood, striving to keep my voice steady, but the lie felt brittle. He didn't believe me. I saw it in the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flexing of his hands at his sides. He took a step closer, and the cloying scent of the expensive cologne Miranda adored, mixed with a sharp tang of wine from dinner, assaulted my senses. "You're a terrible liar," he stated, his voice flat. "Just like your father?" The words struck me like a physical blow. Then, he clamped his fingers around my arm, digging in hard enough to leave bruising, and yanked me toward the ladder. I had to use my free hand to press the journal tightly against my body, preventing it from slipping. Miranda waited at the foot of the ladder, arms crossed, foot tapping an impatient rhythm. Her expression was one of annoyance. "What are you doing, sneaking around like a thief in your own house?" Barnaby smoothly interjected, his grip still possessive on my arm. "She's probably hiding something." A dark, dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. He suggested they search my room. Panic surged. "I just wanted to find my old teddy bear," I blurted, the words tumbling out too fast, too desperate. I can't sleep without my door." Miranda rolled her eyes, but she seemed to accept the excuse, likely too weary to engage in further drama. That night, I waited until their breathing deepened into the rhythmic sounds of sleep, Barnaby's heavy rumble mingling with Miranda's softer sighs. The old house settled into its familiar nocturnal creaks and groans. I carefully tucked the journal inside my pillowcase, feeling its stiff corners dig into my cheek as I finally lay down. I couldn't risk reading more with Barnaby checking on me almost hourly, his dark shadow appearing in my doorway with sickening regularity. The next morning was Saturday. Miranda hummed off-key to a song on the radio as she made pancakes, acting as if nothing was amiss. The forced normalcy turned my stomach. Barnaby's eyes, however, never left me. He watched my every movement across the table as I pushed food around my plate. I excused myself to the bathroom, clutching the journal. I found a plastic bag under the sink and, wrapping the journal carefully, submerged it in the cold water of the toilet tank, the chill seeping into my arms as I hid it away. On Monday at school, I slipped into the computer lab during lunch, telling Amelia and my other friends I had a project to finish. The room was empty save for the low hum of ancient machines and the rhythmic tick of the wall clock. My hand still trembled as I held my phone, angling it carefully to avoid the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights, snapping photos of each page of the journal. Some were blurry from my shaking hands. The entries spanned years, Felix's familiar handwriting growing more agitated as time progressed. He wrote of his growing suspicions. Barnaby's car parked suspiciously down the street at odd hours. Miranda's increasing distance and odd behavior. One entry mentioned discovering a motel receipt tucked into Miranda's purse when he'd been searching for a stick of gum. Another detailed Barnaby's frequent appearances at the pub during Felix's shifts, always observing from a shadowy corner booth, lurking like a predator studying its prey. I uploaded every image to a newly created cloud account under a fictitious name, my heart hammering as the progress bar slowly filled. Then, I deleted the photos from my phone, checking twice, 3 times, to ensure they were truly gone. I knew Barnaby had started routinely checking my belongings. When I arrived home that day, he was waiting in my room, seated on my bed, as if he owned it. He'd ransacked everything. My dresser drawers lay spilled across the floor, clothes strewn like autumn leaves. My mattress was flipped, exposing the raw wooden box spring beneath. Even my old jewelry box upturned, cheap necklaces and friendship bracelets tangled in a glittering heap. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I feigned ignorance, tilting my head, trying to look confused rather than terrified. He seized my shoulders, shaking me violently, my teeth clacking together. "Don't play stupid, Delia. I know you found something in the attic." Miranda arrived home just then. her keys jingling as she called out a cheerful greeting. She peered into my room, her eyebrows raised at the chaos. "What's going on here?" Barnaby's demeanor shifted instantly, a mask of smooth composure falling over his face. He smoothly lied. "I'm just helping Delia reorganize her messy room, darling. She asked for my help." He even smiled, that insincere smile that never quite reached his eyes. She believed him, as she always did, probably because it was simpler than questioning. That evening at dinner, Barnaby announced they were moving up the wedding date. Instead of next year, it would be next month. He couldn't wait any longer, he declared, to make our family official. Miranda squealed with delight, clapping her hands like a child. I felt bile rise in my throat. The roasted chicken on my plate suddenly looked gray and unappetizing. Over the following weeks, Barnaby's surveillance became relentless. He installed a camera in the hallway, its unblinking red light pointing directly at where my door used to be. He began driving me to and from school. No more bus rides with Amelia. He'd idle in the parking lot, engine running, his eyes scanning everyone I spoke to. At night, he'd confiscate my phone, placing it on his nightstand, unreachable. But I continued my work during the day. I printed pages from the journal at school, hiding them in my locker, taping them behind forgotten textbooks. I desperately needed help, but felt utterly alone. My teacher seemed oblivious, my friends too young to comprehend. Then, I remembered Ulysses Holt, Felix's best friend since their school days. He was the kind of man who appeared without being asked, offering steadfast support. They had been inseparable until Felix's arrest. Miranda had forbidden him from contacting us afterward, claiming he was a bad influence who encouraged Felix's violent tendencies. But I knew that was a lie. Ulysses was a good man. His rough hands always smelling faintly of sawdust, his pockets invariably stocked with butterscotch candies. He worked in construction and had 3 children of his own, twin boys and a little girl who insisted on calling me her big cousin. I found his number in an old address book Miranda had inexplicably left in the kitchen's junk drawer, buried beneath expired coupons and dead batteries. I called him from the payphone outside the school during PE class. The cold metal receiver pressed against my ear. I told the teacher I felt ill, clutching my stomach for dramatic effect. Ulysses answered on the 3rd ring, his gruff voice softening instantly when I identified myself. Words tumbled out, fast and frantic. I needed help. Felix was innocent. I had proof. He urged me to slow down, to breathe. Then he instructed me to meet him at the public library after school the following day. He'd tell Miranda he'd merely offered me a ride if she inquired. His voice was calm, reassuring, and for the first time in weeks, a fragile sense of hope bloomed within me. Barnaby was suspicious when I informed him I was staying late for a group project. He grilled me about my group members, the project's subject, the assigning teacher. But my history teacher, likely annoyed at being disturbed during her planning period, confirmed my story when he called to check. I practically sprinted to the library, my backpack thudding against my back. Ulysses was waiting in his old pickup truck, its red paint faded but immaculately clean, in the parking lot. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his beard, deeper lines etched around his eyes. I quickly showed him the photos of the journal entries on my phone, swiping through them one after another. With each image, his face grew darker, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He confirmed he'd always sensed something was amiss with Felix's arrest. The narrative never quite fit. Too many gaps, too convenient. He asked if I still possessed the physical journal. I told him where I'd hidden it, and he nodded approvingly. He explained that Felix's suspicions alone weren't enough. We needed concrete evidence, witnesses. He knew people who had been working at the pub that night. Perhaps they had seen something, remembered something the police had failed to ask. Over the next 2 weeks, I met Ulysses at the library 3 more times. Each meeting felt like a scene from a spy movie, checking over my shoulder, taking circuitous routes. He tracked down Ethan Stone, who had been working security that night. Ethan, a large man with gentle eyes, possessed an eidetic memory. He distinctly recalled Barnaby being there, which was odd, as Barnaby had told the police he'd been home all evening. Ethan had seen Barnaby enter the restroom just before Felix, perhaps 30 seconds prior. But Ethan had been too intimidated to speak up after Felix's swift arrest, fearing entanglement, fearing Barnaby, who seemed to have connections everywhere. Ulysses also located Clara Bellwether, who had been tending bar. She had a mop of vibrant red curls and a keen eye for faces. She recounted Barnaby's recurring presence for weeks before the incident, always inquiring about Felix's shifts, feigning amiability. She'd found it peculiar, but hadn't thought much of it then. Patrons often asked about regulars. She remembered Barnaby ordering a whiskey neat that night, then vanishing for a while before the body was discovered. She had been the one to dial 911, her hands shaking so violently she could barely operate the phone. The true breakthrough arrived when Ulysses spoke to Ben Maddox, the pub manager. Ben, an older gentleman who'd managed the establishment for 2 decades, mentioned that they'd upgraded their security system a month before the incident. The police had only secured the main camera footage, but there was a forgotten backup system that recorded the hallway leading to the restrooms. Ben still had those files on an old hard drive in his office, gathering dust behind stacks of old liquor invoices, until Ulysses' persistent questioning jogged his memory. We met at Ben's house to view the footage. His living room smelled of stale cigarettes and strong coffee. My stomach churned as Ben connected the drive to his laptop. The timestamp showed Barnaby entering the restroom at 9:47 p.m., strolling casually, as if he had all the time in the world. Felix entered at 9:52 p.m., likely just needing the facilities after his shift. Barnaby exited at 9:51 p.m., checking his watch and smoothing down his expensive shirt. Felix emerged at 9:53 p.m., covered in blood, shouting for help, his face a mask of shock and horror. It was undeniably clear. Barnaby had 4 minutes alone in that bathroom. More than enough time to make a call and set up his monstrous frame-up. Ulysses copied the incriminating footage onto multiple USB drives, his hands steady and methodical. He cautioned that we needed to proceed with extreme care. We couldn't simply go to the police. Barnaby might still have influential connections, friends who owed him favors. We needed to construct an unassailable case first. He instructed me to maintain a facade of normalcy at home, to betray no hint of our discovery. It was the most challenging act of my life. But Barnaby must have sensed something. Perhaps my acting skills weren't flawless, or perhaps his paranoia had simply intensified. He grew increasingly aggressive. One night, he entered my room and sat on my bed, the mattress sinking beneath his considerable weight. The hallway camera couldn't capture him from that angle. He whispered that he knew I had been secretly meeting with Ulysses. Someone had spotted us at the library, likely one of his cronies who seemed to be omnipresent. He warned that if I didn't cease my clandestine activities, Miranda might face dire consequences. Accidents happen all the time, he mused, his voice chillingly casual, as if discussing the weather. People fall downstairs, cars experience brake failures, gas leaks occur. I understood the insidious threat. It settled in my chest like a cold, heavy stone. Terrified but resolute, I tried to keep my breathing even, to betray no fear. I recounted the threat to Ulysses at our next meeting, whispering despite our isolation. He confirmed we needed to accelerate our timeline. He'd already briefed Felix's attorney, revealing our findings. The lawyer was enthusiastic but prudent. He stated that we also needed the original journal. It would bolster the case, proving the photos weren't fabricated. I agreed to retrieve it, though the mere thought made my stomach clench. That night, I waited until 3 a.m., watching the digital clock's red numbers change with agonizing slowness. I crept to the bathroom, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I carefully extracted the journal from the toilet tank. The plastic wrapping had protected it perfectly. Felix's words were safe. I tucked it into my backpack for school, zipping it securely into the inner pocket. But as I emerged from the bathroom, Barnaby stood in the hallway, a spectral presence. "What are you doing up?" he asked, his eyes glinting in the darkness. I feigned illness, clutching my stomach. He stared for a long moment, then, to my surprise, allowed me to pass. I felt his gaze burning into my back all the way to my room. The next morning, my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, empty, its contents strewn across the table. Barnaby sat there, the journal open before him, flipping through its pages with theatrical interest. Miranda stood beside him, her face pale with confusion as she read over his shoulder. Barnaby, ever the smooth manipulator, had told her I'd been writing fantasy stories about him, that I was disturbed and needed help. He began pointing out specific entries, saying, "Look how she tries to copy your husband's handwriting. See how she mentions you and me together? This is clearly her sick fantasy, trying to break us apart." Miranda's confusion curdled into anger as Barnaby continued his deceptive narrative, weaving lies with just enough truth to make them plausible. She believed him, utterly. She expressed her profound disappointment, stating that fabricating such malicious falsehoods about Barnaby was sick, and that she had hoped I was coping with Felix's absence more constructively. I tried to protest, to tell her it was Felix's journal, but she wouldn't listen. She accused me of forging Felix's handwriting to frame Barnaby, claiming I simply couldn't accept him as my new father. She declared I needed therapy, perhaps even a special boarding school for troubled teenagers. Barnaby suggested his cousin ran one in another neighboring state. Very strict, very isolated. Good for fixing problem children who tell lies and cause trouble. The way he uttered those words sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in, the room subtly spinning. That day at school, I found Ulysses Holt's truck in the parking lot during lunch. I scrambled inside, collapsing into racking sobs as I recounted the morning's events. He assured me not to worry. We still had the footage. But when I returned home that afternoon, my phone was conspicuously absent from my backpack. Barnaby had it. He'd meticulously gone through everything and discovered my cloud account, correctly guessing the password after only 3 attempts. He forced me to watch as he deleted all the journal photos, his fingers stabbing at the screen with vicious satisfaction. He gloated that Ulysses' copies wouldn't matter without the original to verify them. He argued that photos could easily be doctored, that any competent lawyer would dismiss them without the original journal for handwriting comparison. The bar footage, he conceded, was different, from an official security system with verifiable timestamps. But handwriting and photos? Too simple to forge. That night, Miranda informed me I was leaving for boarding school on Monday. This special place would purportedly help me conquer my delusions about Barnaby. She had already contacted the school. They expected me. It was 1,000 miles away, nestled deep in the mountains. No phones allowed, no outside contact for the initial 6 months to avoid negative influences. It dawned on me. This was Barnaby's ultimate plan, to silence me permanently, to make me vanish without resorting to murder. I managed to slip out Saturday morning while Miranda was grocery shopping and Barnaby was in the shower. I could hear the spray of water as I cautiously eased open the front door. I ran to Amelia Finch's house and used her phone to call Ulysses. Amelia's mom was at work, and Amelia, bless her, covered for me. I frantically told him about the boarding school. He instructed me to pack a small bag and meet him at the library in an hour. But when I returned home, Barnaby was waiting on the front steps, his hair still damp. He had noticed my absence. He dragged me inside by my hair, my scalp burning with pain. Miranda wasn't back yet. He hurled me against the wall with such force that a framed picture clattered to the floor. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. "I've worked too hard to let a bratty kid destroy my plans." He declared that Felix deserved to rot in prison, that he'd been meticulously plotting this for months before that night at the pub. He gloated about Miranda, calling her easy to manipulate, so desperate for attention after Felix had taken on 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. "Why did you call that man in the bathroom?" I demanded, needing to hear it from his lips. Barnaby let out a guttural, ugly laugh. He said the guy was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Barnaby had entered the restroom to plant a bloodied knife he'd prepared, one that would bear Felix's fingerprints from our kitchen at home. But the intoxicated man saw him placing it near the sink and started asking questions, getting too close. So, Barnaby had to silence him quickly and messily, using that very knife. Then, when Felix entered minutes later to offer help, it was perfect. The blood was fresh. Felix's fingerprints were transferred onto everything as he tried to assist the victim, tried to staunch the bleeding. And in the ensuing chaos, Barnaby pocketed the actual murder weapon, leaving a different, prepared knife at the scene, one that couldn't be traced back to him. I was recording every word on Amelia's phone, which I'd hidden in my pocket, the record button already pressed before I even stepped inside. Barnaby didn't notice. He was too consumed with ranting about his cleverness, how he'd worn gloves, how he'd meticulously studied the pub's schedule for weeks. He stated that after Felix was gone, marrying Miranda was merely smart business. She possessed excellent life insurance from her hospital job, and I, her dependent, would be worth even more in Social Security if something were to happen to her. Perhaps a car accident, a fall, or maybe she'd simply grow despondent and take too many pills. That's when Miranda walked in. She'd returned early, having forgotten her wallet. She had heard every word Barnaby had just uttered. Her face went ashen, like blank paper. The groceries tumbled from her arms, oranges rolling across the floor. Barnaby spun around, his eyes wide with the realization of his catastrophic mistake. He stammered, attempting to backtrack, claiming I'd provoked him, that he didn't mean it, that he was merely trying to scare me straight. But Miranda had heard enough. The veil had finally lifted. Barnaby stepped toward her, and she instinctively recoiled, her hand instinctively reaching behind her. "Get out," she ordered, her voice trembling but firm. He laughed, dismissive. "You wouldn't dare. Too much scandal, too much shame. What would the neighbors think?" But Miranda's hand was steady as she gripped a kitchen knife from the block. For the first time in months, I saw the Miranda I used to know, the one who protected me from nightmares and kissed scraped knees. Barnaby finally realized she was serious. His face contorted, the smooth mask utterly crumbling. He snatched his keys and wallet from the counter, but before exiting, he turned to Miranda, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't over. I know too much about you. About the affairs you had before Felix, even when you were first married. About the money you stole from his savings to cover your shopping debts. If you go to the police, I'll destroy your reputation." Then he was gone, slamming the door with such force that the windows rattled and the remaining pictures fell from the walls. Miranda collapsed to the floor, her body racked with shuddering sobs. I sat beside her and played the recording from Amelia's phone. She listened to Barnaby's chilling confession again, her face disintegrating further with each word. She kept murmuring apologies, calling herself so stupid, admitting she had failed both Felix and me. I urged her to call the police immediately, but she was paralyzed by Barnaby's threats, terrified of losing everything. I called Ulysses, and he arrived within minutes, the bar footage on a USB drive in hand. We settled Miranda at the kitchen table and showed her everything. The screenshot images of the journal entries, the security footage meticulously detailing Barnaby's movements, the notarized witness statements Ulysses had painstakingly collected. Miranda retched when the full, horrifying realization struck her, that she had been sharing a bed with Felix's killer for months, that she had been planning a wedding with him. Finally, she agreed to contact the authorities. 2 detectives arrived to take our statements. They were professional but compassionate, offering Miranda tissues and speaking to me with gentle concern. They listened to the recording of Barnaby's confession multiple times, then watched the bar footage on our laptop. They took the journal as evidence, handling it with careful, gloved hands. One detective admitted they'd harbored doubts about Felix's case all along. The forensics had never quite aligned, but the pressure to close the case had been intense. Barnaby's confession, he stated, filled in all the perplexing gaps. An arrest warrant for Barnaby was issued that night, but he had vanished. His apartment was empty, cleaned out in a hurry. His car was gone. The police assured us they would find him. They stationed a patrol car outside our house, just in case. Miranda and I didn't sleep that night. We pushed the sofa against the front door and huddled in the living room with all the lights ablaze, jumping at every subtle sound. The next morning, Ulysses called. He had heard from his construction network that Barnaby had been spotted at a motel 2 towns over, attempting to pay cash for a room. The police were already en route. By noon, they had him in custody. He attempted to flee, but didn't get far. Evidence linking him to the original murder weapon was discovered in his car. He had kept the actual knife all these years, a morbid trophy hidden in a locked box in his trunk. The knife found at the crime scene had indeed been a decoy, but the real one still bore traces of the victim's blood in the crevices of its handle. Barnaby initially denied everything. He claimed I'd fabricated the recording using AI, that Miranda was lying to protect me because she felt guilty about Felix. But the evidence was overwhelming. The bar footage undeniably showed him entering that restroom. His fingerprints were found on the actual murder weapon once it was properly tested. The forensics that had never matched Felix suddenly made perfect sense when applied to Barnaby. Even the angle of the victim's wounds aligned with Barnaby's height, not Felix's. Faced with the mountain of proof, Barnaby finally broke. He confessed fully in exchange for a plea deal, admitting to orchestrating the entire plot, framing Felix, and manipulating Miranda. He even confessed to other crimes we knew nothing about. Murders in other states, other victims falsely accused. The detective described Barnaby as a serial predator who had evaded justice for years, drifting from place to place, consistently targeting vulnerable women with children. Felix's lawyer immediately filed for an emergency appeal based on the new evidence. The judge reviewed everything and ordered Felix's immediate release. After 8 months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Felix Maxwell was coming home. Miranda and I drove to pick him up. The ride was silent save for the soft murmur of the radio. Miranda wept quietly, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. I remained wordless, my throat tight with a tangle of emotions. When the prison gates swung open and Felix emerged, he seemed smaller than I remembered, thinner, older, his hair more silver than brown, but his eyes lit up incandescently when they met mine. I ran to him, embracing him tighter than I had ever embraced anyone. He smelled different, of industrial soap and underlying sadness, but he was undeniably my father. He held me, burying his face in my hair, whispering how much he'd miss me, how he'd never stop believing I would uncover the truth. Miranda stood back, uncertain, wringing her hands. Felix looked at her for a long moment, then simply said they would talk later. For now, he just wanted to go home. The drive back was subdued, save for Felix's quiet questions. How was school? Have you grown taller? Is your favorite diner still open? Normal fatherly inquiries that felt anything but normal after the ordeal we'd endured. We arrived home, and Felix paused in the doorway for a long minute, surveying the familiar space as if committing every detail to memory. The house felt different without Barnaby's oppressive belongings, Miranda having purged anything he touched, leaving strange empty spaces on shelves and walls. Felix walked through each room slowly, tracing his fingers over furniture, picking up picture frames Miranda hadn't yet replaced. That first night was excruciatingly awkward. Felix opted to sleep on the sofa, despite Miranda offering their old bedroom. At 3 a.m., I heard him moving about, likely unable to sleep after months in a confined cell. I found him in the kitchen, making coffee, his hands trembling slightly. We sat at the table in silence until he finally asked if I was okay, truly okay. I recounted everything about Barnaby, about the ordeal. He listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each grim detail. When I finished, he apologized for not being able to protect me. I assured him it wasn't his fault. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of lawyers and paperwork. Felix's attorney worked tirelessly to get his record entirely expunged, not just overturned. There was talk of compensation for wrongful imprisonment, but Felix dismissively stated he cared nothing for money. He simply wanted his life back. Miranda persistently tried to engage him, following him through the house, but he wasn't ready. He'd answer her questions monosyllabically, finding excuses to leave the room. Barnaby's trial date was set for 6 months out. The prosecutor confidently stated that with his full confession and all our evidence, he would undoubtedly receive life without parole. They had linked him to 3 other murders in different states, all following strikingly similar patterns. He would frame someone close to the victim, then swoop in to comfort the grieving family. The detective noted we were fortunate that his other victims hadn't survived to expose him. I returned to school, but everything felt irrevocably altered. Kids whispered when I walked by. Everyone knew about Barnaby and Felix by now. Amelia remained fiercely loyal, as did a few other friends who truly mattered. My teachers were excessively kind, which almost made it worse. I craved normalcy, not pity, but normalcy felt like a distant memory, probably forever out of reach. Felix started working construction with Ulysses. Manual labor, he explained, helped clear his head. He'd come home exhausted and covered in dust, but he seemed calmer. He also began seeing a therapist, a specialist in wrongful conviction trauma. Felix didn't discuss the sessions, but I could discern their positive impact. He stopped flinching when doors slammed. He ceased obsessively checking locks. Miranda moved out after 2 weeks. She rented a small apartment across town, claiming she needed space to process things. I felt a sense of relief, honestly. The tension when she and Felix occupied the same room was suffocating. She had betrayed him in the most profound way imaginable, even if Barnaby had manipulated her. Some things I realized are simply impossible to recover from. She asked if I wanted to stay with her occasionally, but I declined. I needed to be with Felix. The divorce papers arrived a month later. Felix signed them without a glance, simply wanting it over. Miranda gave him everything. The house, the car, full custody of me. Her guilt, I suspected, was consuming her. She too started seeing a therapist, trying to comprehend how she could have been so utterly blind. I felt a flicker of pity for her sometimes. But then I'd recall how she chose Barnaby over Felix, how she doubted my truth, and the sympathy would inevitably dry up and Ulysses became a regular fixture in our lives. He'd bring his children over on weekends, and we'd have cookouts like the old days. His twin boys, Everett and Jasper, only 10, idolized Felix. They cared nothing for his past, only that he could throw a football and spin hilarious tales. His daughter, Daisy, was my age, and we quickly forged a deep bond. She understood what it was like to have your family violently upended. Her own mother had left when she was 10. 3 months after Felix's release, I had to testify at a pre-trial hearing. The prosecutor emphasized that my testimony would be crucial in preventing Barnaby from claiming insanity or coercion. I wore my nicest dress, the blue one Felix had bought me for my birthday 2 years prior. My hands trembled as I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth. Barnaby sat at the defense table in a bright orange jumpsuit, looking diminished, smaller than I remembered. He tried to meet my gaze, but I stared straight ahead. I recounted everything. The threats, the inappropriate touching, the night at the hotel. The judge had to call a recess when I spoke about finding Felix's journal because I began to sob too uncontrollably to continue. Felix wasn't permitted in the courtroom, as he might be called as a witness later. But Ulysses was there. He gave me a reassuring thumbs up from the gallery, a silent reminder of my bravery, my strength. Barnaby's lawyer attempted to portray me as a confused, imaginative child, asking if I had perhaps misunderstood Barnaby's intentions. I remained calm, reiterating exactly what had happened. The prosecutor then played the recording from Amelia's phone, and Barnaby's face drained of all color. His lawyer requested a plea deal that afternoon, 25 years to life, instead of life without parole. The prosecutor's response was a resounding, "No way." After the hearing, reporters swarmed us outside the courthouse. Felix shielded me with his body as we pushed through the clamoring throng toward Ulysses' truck. They shouted questions about forgiveness, about moving forward, about how it felt to see Barnaby in chains. We offered no answers. There was nothing to say that would make them truly understand. This wasn't entertainment. This was our shattered, reassembling life. Miranda began sending me letters. Long, rambling apologies for her failings as a mother, for her inability to see the obvious signs. I read the first few, then began discarding them unopened. Felix suggested I consider forgiving her eventually. For my own peace, not for hers. But I wasn't ready. Perhaps I never would be. She had chosen a monster over her own family. Some things were unforgivable. Barnaby's actual trial was brutal. They brought in the families of his other victims, laying bare the chilling pattern of his behavior. One woman from Arizona testified about dating him after her husband died in a suspicious accident. She'd sensed bad vibes and ended things, likely saving her own life. Another family from Nevada spoke of their son, who was serving time for a murder that chillingly mirrored Felix's case. The prosecutor announced they were reopening that case as well. Felix testified on day 3. He wore his only suit, the one from his wedding to Miranda that he'd inexplicably kept. He spoke of finding the body, of his desperate attempt to help, of the bewildering confusion when they arrested him. He spoke of prison, of missing my birthdays, of writing letters he knew I'd never read. His voice broke when he recounted the day I was born, how he'd vowed to always protect me and felt he had utterly failed. Barnaby took the stand on day 5, against his lawyer's strong advice. He attempted to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, claiming the man in the bathroom had attacked him first. But under relentless cross-examination, his fabricated story imploded. He contradicted himself, grew visibly angry, revealing his true, monstrous face to the jury. When the prosecutor pressed him about his future plans for Miranda and me, he refused to answer. Even his own lawyer looked defeated. The jury deliberated for a mere 2 hours, guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy, fraud, attempted assault on a minor. The list was extensive. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, consecutive sentences for each crime. Barnaby showed no reaction, merely staring blankly at the table. As they led him away, he looked at me one last time. I met his gaze directly, willing him to see that he hadn't broken me, that I had won. Felix and I went to his favorite restaurant afterward, the small Mexican place that still had his picture on the wall from his regular days. The owner embraced him, declaring the meal on the house. We ate in a comfortable silence, both utterly exhausted but profoundly relieved. It was over, truly over. Barnaby would die in prison, and we could finally begin to rebuild. Miranda attempted to visit the house the following week. Felix wouldn't let her in, speaking to her through the screen door. She wanted to apologize again, wanted to try family counseling. Felix refused. That ship, he stated, had sailed. She needed to move on, and so did we. She wept and pleaded, but Felix stood firm. I watched from the stairs, feeling nothing. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I, too, began seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Coraline Davies, who specialized in trauma. She helped me process everything, gently reminding me that it wasn't my fault, that I had been incredibly brave. Some days I believed her, some days I didn't. But slowly, the nightmares began to recede. I stopped obsessively checking locks. I stopped flinching when men walked behind me. Progress, I learned, came in imperceptible, tiny steps. Felix and I established new routines. Sunday breakfast at the diner, Wednesday movie nights, helping Ulysses with construction projects on Saturdays. We talked more than we ever had before, about everything: school, friends, the future. He helped me with homework, even though mathematics wasn't his strong suit. He attended every school event, cheering too loudly at my decidedly mediocre clarinet performances. We were learning how to be a family again, just the two of us. 6 months after the trial, Felix met someone. Clara Bellwether, the vibrant bartender who had testified, started coming around, initially just as a friend, then something more. She made Felix laugh, genuine, unrestrained laughter, not the strained, polite chuckles he'd been forcing. I liked her. She didn't try to be my mother. She simply treated me like a person. She'd bring takeout, and we'd watch terrible movies, gleefully dissecting their plot holes. Felix smiled more whenever she was near. Miranda eventually ceased attempting to contact us. I heard from Amelia's mom that she had relocated to another state, seeking a fresh start where no one knew her story. A part of me hoped she would find peace. Another part, a colder, harder part, didn't care. She had been so easily duped, so swift to replace Felix. Perhaps Barnaby had recognized that vulnerability in her from the very beginning. Perhaps that was why he had selected our family to dismantle. A year after everything, Felix received a settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. Not millions, but enough to pay off the house, and set aside a substantial sum for my college education. He bought a new pickup truck, took a vacation to the mountains, and finally, truly, began living again. He continued working construction, though. He said he appreciated the honest simplicity of it. You either built something correctly, or you didn't. No room for lies or manipulation. I turned 17 that spring. Felix threw me a large party, likely overcompensating for the birthdays he'd missed. Ulysses' family came. Clara was there. Even some kids from school showed up. We had a ridiculous bounce house, far too childish for teenagers, but no one complained. Felix grilled burgers and regaled everyone with embarrassing stories from my childhood. For a few precious hours, we felt like a normal family, enjoying a perfectly normal party. That night, after everyone had departed, Felix and I cleaned up the yard in comfortable silence. He thanked me for believing in him, for never giving up. I told him I had always known he was innocent, that he wasn't capable of harming anyone. He hugged me tightly, burying his face in my hair, whispering that I had saved his life. We both shed a few tears, but they were the good kind of tears, the healing kind. Life moved forward. I made the honor roll, began dating a kind, intelligent boy named Ronan Blackwood from my chemistry class. Felix jokingly threatened to clean his shotgun when Ronan came over, but it was mostly an act. Clara moved in after a year, bringing her grumpy cat, Mr. Whiskers, who immediately claimed Felix's favorite armchair. We became a peculiar little family, forged from shared trauma, but held together by conscious choice and profound love. Barnaby died in prison 2 years later. A heart attack, the official letter stated. He was 43. I felt nothing when I read it. I simply closed the letter and returned to my homework. Felix asked if I was all right, and I replied, "Yes, I really am." Barnaby had been dead to me since the day they sentenced him. His actual death was merely paperwork, nothing more. Miranda sent a card for my 18th birthday. It simply read, "Love, Mom." No return address. I kept it for some reason, tucked into my desk drawer with other small items I couldn't quite bring myself to discard. Felix suggested that perhaps someday I would want to find her, to make peace. Maybe he was right. Or maybe some bridges were meant to remain burned. Only time would tell. I gained admission to college on a full scholarship, intending to study criminal justice. Perhaps I would become a lawyer, helping other families ripped apart by deception. Felix cried openly at my graduation, embarrassing me in front of everyone. Clara took a million photographs, while Ulysses' family cheered boisterously from the bleachers. My chosen family, the one that had stood by me when everything else had crumbled. The night before I left for college, Felix and I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. He told me he was incredibly proud of me, that I had blossomed into an extraordinary young woman despite everything. I told him I loved him, that he was the finest father anyone could ever wish for. We settled into a comfortable silence. No more words were needed. We had survived the unimaginable and emerged stronger. That, in itself, was more than enough.